Hi everyone, my name is Ricardo Mallols. I work at SkyTV, and I would like to talk about sign-up journeys. How we solve the problem of building advanced forms for millions of potential customers. So this story talks about NowTV. NowTV is the video-on-demand platform of the SkyTV group. Essentially, it offers premium content like Game of Thrones, the Premier League, or the Formula One Championship. So what's the problem? Historically speaking, the sign-up and the checkout journeys have not been managed by NowTV. There was an external app that took the responsibility of getting new customers and stuff like that, right? Obviously, that's not ideal. And at some point, NowTV wanted to take control on that in order to be able to react fast and efficiently to the incoming requirements. Based on that, we realized that we needed a mechanism to display forms fast and efficiently. And here is where I would like to start talking about Nemo. What's Nemo? What's Nemo in this context? It's a form builder. Nothing else. Nothing more. It's based on Angular. It comes with a declarative and data-driven API. And essentially, it offers a modular set of input types and validation rules. We'll come back to this concept afterwards. Let me show you some examples. This is a form based on Nemo. So I think it's quite classical, right? You can identify really easily things like labels, different types of data, select, text, checkbox, stuff like that. Then we get placeholders and even more kind of exotic stuff like contextual help to improve the feedback that the user receives. So everything looks fine so far, but let's see what happens if we try to submit this form. We start getting errors everywhere, right? So now I would like to explain the behavior of this form. So where is this data coming from? I have here an example. This is a JSON file that is simulating a kind of a real HTTP response. So in here we can identify interesting things like, for instance, this is all the different fields that we're displaying. So then we can see that, for instance, if we go back to the form, as soon as we change the data model, Nemo is going to react immediately. So it's going to provide real-time feedback, and it's going to tell us which is the correct state of each field of the form. So that's fairly trivial, right? If we go to the first name, we can see, if we inspect this JSON a little bit, that we have several validation rules with this kind of configure-oriented API. So the first name is a required field. It has min length, it has max length, and it can even have some kind of regex to avoid kind of funny or weird characters as well. So based on that, if we try to type something valid here, like Michael, everything is all right. Funny times. However, if we type something, if we break the max length validation rule, we'll get the proper message, right? That's quite predictable. Or similarly, if we type a funny character, same thing, we get a different kind of error. So that's pretty straightforward, but things may become eventually more interesting when we start talking about cross-field validation. What that means? Let's have a look to the last name. We have a bunch of validation rules as well, but I would like to pay attention to this one. So look at how expressive this API is. Here we say, hey, Nemo, the last name will be required dependent on the value of the first name. So if we change the first name and we type Marty, the last name becomes invalid, right? We can get the error message. Based on that, we had to set our last name, that, as you can guess, is going to be McFly, right? The last name is valid. Obviously, this could become worse if we type something weird, but yeah, let's keep it simple. So next thing, email. I'm not going to stop here because I think that's quite predictable, right? So you can figure out we have a validation rule with some kind of regex that is checking the proper format of the email. So that's quite trivial. And then the password. There is something interesting in the password. I'll show you. Again, cross-field validation. Let me minimize that. So if we check the properties of the password, you can see how many complexity we have here. The field is required, min length, max length, a lot of things, right? But I would like to pay attention to this must not contain. Look at how expressive this is. So here we say, hey, Nemo, the password must not contain the first name because of security reasons, right? So if I type something, if I type a really strong password like foobar, the field is valid. But if now I'm so smart that I decide to type here Marty, the field automatically becomes invalid. Obviously, at this point, we have two options. Either we change the first name, then it's OK, or we get rid of that part of the password. Cool. Last but not least, terms and conditions, required field. Seems fairly trivial, but there is something interesting here. So we have been talking about input types. We have been talking about validation rules. So in Nemo, those mechanisms are absolutely decoupled. We can attach any validation rule to any field. Right. I think now it looks OK, right? We get greens everywhere. So let's see what happens if we submit this form. What happened here? So we pick the data from the form, we send it to the backend, and the backend said, sorry, Marty McFly already signed up in this form in the past, which is kind of a funny concept. So based on that, we have a problem, because Nemo says, hey, I can ensure this field is valid, but now we know this is not valid, so we had to tell Nemo, please change the validity of that field, right? So the interesting concept here is that Nemo is really useful to display forms and to validate data. But on top of that, it comes with a really powerful API. So we can perform operations like, Nemo, give me the values of the form, give me the specific validity state of that field, give me properties like, is this field dirty, has this field been touched, those kind of things, right? And on top of that, this is a setter mechanism. So we can tell Nemo, hey, Nemo, I trust you 90% of the time, but in this specific case, you are wrong. I don't care what you think about the email. That field is invalid. So please invalidate the field and set up this kind of message, right? Cool. Just to let you know that we went live with Nemo the last month, so this is really fresh content, actually. At the moment, we have proper monitoring coverage with regards to things like HTTP errors or client-side errors and those kind of things. And now we have started to prototype a different kind of monitoring. And I'm referring specifically to business logic error monitoring. What that means? Let me show you an example. So essentially, in this screen, you can see this is dynamic data, actually, that is coming from my form. So we can inspect for each field of the form where are the bottlenecks, where the users are having actual problems trying to get rid of the errors, right? So for instance, really easily, we can identify that users having a lot of problems trying to set up a valid email address, right? Or with regards to the first name, they are failing with everywhere, right? So they're having problems with the required min lengths, math lengths, regex, everything, right? So then what's the goal of this kind of monitoring? Obviously, identify problems, first of all, and then try to minimize them by providing a better user experience, right? Better labels, better help messages, or whatever. Technically speaking, this tool has been built using M3 charts, that, as you maybe know, is a wrapper on top of D3. It's quite interesting because, as you realize, we can get real-time feedback about where the data is coming from, or we can even filter the data. So let's think that we don't care about the required validation rule, or we don't care about min length, right? So we can play around with the visibility of the data as well. Right. Back to the form. So we saw the theory. We saw a couple of examples. And now I would like to do something different, something more complex. Nemo, out of the box, comes with a bunch of input types and validation rules, which is fine if we want to do something quite simple like this thing, right? But obviously, we are sometimes building really complex stuff. Let me give you an example. So for instance, in our checkout journey, we have to care about things like payment information of the user. So the user can, with our web app on his mobile phone, he can point to his credit card, and by taking a picture, we have a bridge that is going to populate that data into Nemo. And it will validate that data as well, of course. Billing address. The user can type his postcode, and we have a kind of exotic field that is going to perform an HTTP request somewhere else, and that request will return a list of valid addresses, right? So what's the conclusion here? Nemo is really good for this kind of basic stuff, but at some point we need more. We need to fine-tune the behavior a little bit. So we thought about that, and because of that, we created a kind of pluggable mechanism, so it's really easy to extend Nemo to add new input types and to add new validation rules. And that's what we are going to do now, and you are going to help me with that. So this part turns around CAPTCHA. I'm not going to create any kind of classical CAPTCHA component because everyone knows how that works, and probably that will be quite boring. But I would like to do something funnier. Question for you guys. Do you know which game is celebrating this year its 30th anniversary? No? Plumber? No? Mario Bros. 30th anniversary. Because of that, I would like now to pay tribute to this iconic game by integrating a CAPTCHA component based on Mario Bros. So what's the goal of CAPTCHA? Obviously to prove that users are actual humans, right? Are not kind of script or something weird. So because of that, we're going to bring Mario here, and the user will have to complete the first level of Mario Bros. To prove that he's a human. That's the idea. How are we going to do that? Obviously, I already did some preparations, right? So probably you know there is an HTML5 project called Full Screen Mario. So someone created a version of Mario Bros. In HTML5. So what I did is I forked that project, and I created a wrapper on Angular that essentially brings the canvas of the game and exposes some relevant events, right? So I'm going to talk about this concept or this idea. So going back to our JSON file, let me just collapse parts of the JSON, right? So we need a new input at the bottom. So look to what we have now here. So I added a new field at the bottom called CAPTCHA Mario. So this field has some properties like, classical things like label of the field. We can even set up kind of contextual help. And the important bit here is that the type, CAPTCHA Mario. What's CAPTCHA Mario? Something that I decided to create. But Nemo is not going to be able to solve our problem here. If we go to the first name, or the last name, type is text. Nemo understands that. But unfortunately, Nemo doesn't understand CAPTCHA Mario. So because of that, what we're going to do now is we're going to register this type. So we're going to tell Nemo, hey, Nemo, be ready, because maybe someone will try to display something called CAPTCHA Mario. If that's the case, please bring this markup and execute this business logic. So how are we going to do that? This is going to be quite simple, actually. We're going to reuse existing patterns. So for instance, let's think for a second on UA router. So how UA router works? Let's say that with UA router we want to define a new state. How do we do that? So as you know, we will go to the config phase of our app. Sorry, here. And then we'll inject the state provider. So then to define a new state, we'll call the state method, passing as a first argument the ID of the method, and then the behavior of that state, right? So we're going to do something fairly similar. Nemo is exposing something called input provider. So we can inject that, and then we can call the input method, passing as a first argument the ID of our sexy input type, and then we can set up some properties. Technically speaking, we could do that here. We can write all our stuff here. But trying to write clean code, I think is not a good pattern. So let's try to keep our config phase as declarative as possible if you want. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bind with an external provider that I already created. CAPTCHA Mario provider. So let's have a quick look to this CAPTCHA Mario provider. Right, what's that? So it's quite easy to identify that here we are returning a kind of directive definition object, right? But be careful with that because this is not a directive. This is a provider, right? Look at the get factory method. So how this is going to work? Every time we register a new custom type, Nemo is going to dynamically create a new directive using the compile provider mechanism. And based on that, it will extend that directive with the object that we are returning here. Because of that, what we get is, for free, Nemo is going to take responsibility on some steps of the form handling lifecycle. And then the developer can focus just on the relevant bits of his journey. So what do we have here? We have a template, right? So this template, for instance, as you can see here, is bringing this is the directive I was talking about before. So this capture Mario will bring the canvas of the game. And then here, I'm pointing to, I'm binding with a couple of callback functions. So I want essentially to set up the data model of this field. And for that, I need to be aware of relevant events. So what happens whenever Mario dies? And what happens whenever Mario completes the level? Because in both cases, we're going to change the data model, right? So what we're going to do here is, anemo, if the user dies, we'll assume he's not a human. So the data model will be set up to false. If the user completes the level, this will work on the other way around. The user will be a human, and consequently, he will be able to submit the form. Right, last thing here. We're going to mark the field as filthy. What that means? By doing that, we are marking the field as dirty and touch. And what that proves is that Nemo is not trying to remain the wheel. Don't get me wrong, Angular form handling capabilities are amazing. Nemo is just a wrapper on top of that is trying to make the form handling lifecycle slightly easier for the developer. So that said, let's go back to our form. Sorry. Let's refresh and see what happened. Yeah. So here's Mario, right? We got the canvas, we got the label, we even get the help message that we prepare. So this is kind of expected, right? So now, as a user, to be able to submit the form, we have to complete the level. But what happened if, because of whatever reason, we're unable to do that? Let's see what happened with regards to the UI. So we could expect that as soon as we die, the field should get this kind of red border, and we should get kind of error message, right? But let's see if that's true or not. It's not true, right? Wait a minute. So look at what happened here. We died. However, Nemo says, yeah, yes, you're a human. It's just kind of weird, right? So what's the problem here? What we did is to set up the data model. Now, the data model of this field is a Boolean, false. But why false mean the field is invalid? I mean, data is valid by default, right? Unless someone tells the opposite. So that's the missing part here. We need to create a validation rule that is inspecting the data model. So whenever the data model changes, this validation rule will set up the proper validity state of this field. So let's do that. That should be quite simple, actually. So we go back to our JSON. So what we need is to create this block at the bottom. So we need a validation array where we're going to specify all the validation rules of this field. So to be fair with you, I mean, we're playing around with Booleans. We could reuse the required validation rule. But just for academic purposes, I would like to create something new. So what do we say here? We're going to create a new validation rule called level complete. So we're going to say, hey, Nemo, whenever the data model is true, please mark the field as valid. Otherwise, we'll show a friendly message to the user. Right. We still have one problem. What level complete means? No one knows, right? That's something I could have written here foo. So remember the problem with the type of field. So then we have a problem with type of validation rule. Same problem, same solution. Again, go to our app, config phase. Nemo is exposing the validation provider mechanism. So validation provider.validation, we pass the ID of the validation rule. I think it's called level complete. And then here, we, again, combine with an external provider. So very quickly, let's review what this level complete provider is talking about. This is really simple. So for every validation rule, we can define a callback function that will be triggered every time the data model changes. So in here, whatever this function returns will set the validity of that validation rule, as we have just one validation rule that will set as a side effect the validity of the field. So what do we see here? We have a couple of arguments. That's the actual value of the field. We know it's going to be true or false. And then we have a pointer to the validation rule that we just created. So in there, we say that the field will be valid whenever validation rule.value is true. So whenever value equals true, that will return true, the field will be valid. If the value is false, false will not be equal to true, the field will become invalid. So let's try again. Right. You see the difference, right? So we got the error, right? This is expected. It works as designed, at least. So now, to submit the form, obviously, we have to complete the level. And I said before that I wanted to require your help. So I need a volunteer to come here and play Mario Bros. Come here. Let's have a big hand for him. Hi. Your name is?
My name is Jean.
Nice to meet you. So, do you know that Chuck Norris finished Mario Bros. Without jumping?
Without jumping? Oh.
Right. So, sorry for that. Eh? Right. So you have to move left and right with the arrows,
Yes.
and then hold Shift to run. I recommend you to hold Shift all the time, and then you have just one opportunity, so no pressure at all, right? Right. Yeah. So. Yeah. Right. Good luck. Oh, nice one. Thank you very much. Well played. Look at the validity of the field. Yes. You're a human. Nice one. So, we're almost done. I have still a couple of minutes, so I would like to tell you one more thing. Obviously, getting new customers is always a great experience, right? In our team, in NowTV, we have a business analyst. So his main responsibility is to perform kind of business intelligence in our database. So whenever he detects that we have a new customer, he comes back to us and he expresses how happy he is. Right, he came with me today. So I'm really proud to introduce you to my BA, Frostly. So he's a contractor, actually. So I'm going to do something. Ideally, Frostly is connected to our database. I don't know if this is going to work. Unfortunately, Frostly doesn't like this kind of carpet. But yeah, let's try that. So I'm going to try to drop Frostly on the floor, and I'm going to submit the form. And we're going to see how Frostly reacts against that, right? Unfortunately, we have another problem here, is that the setup of this room is not ideal, so you are not going to be able to see anything from the back. But I would like to minimize the impact by doing something really rudimentary, but that maybe should work. I have a webcam here. So, well, we can, you know what? We can take a picture and then we can send it to Twitter. So we can say hello to Douglas Crackford, for instance. So can we have, guys, can we have more light to get a proper picture? Yeah, you're the guy. So at 3, let's say something like NG, right? And let's see, that's quite complex right, okay. So let's say NG. NG. Oh, that's crap, right? Well, that doesn't matter. So the thing is, ideally, I'm going to, at least to send kind of video to the back of the room. So, yeah, again, I don't know if this is going to work, but yeah, let's just try. So, first try. Come on, Frostly. Oh, he's upset. Something went wrong. Sorry, something went wrong. Oh, look at that. Wrong email. Nice one, Frostly. Cool. Right. No pressure, eh? Last try. Come on, Frosco. Yeah. Oh yeah, Frosco, nice one. So that was it, guys. Thank you for watching.